Welcome to the Orlando Sentinel Editorial Board interview with the Democratic challenger for State House District 45, which takes in parts of Orange and Osceola counties and includes Walt Disney World. This district is currently held by Representative Carolina Amnesty. She's a first-term Republican who, until recently, served as the vice president at her family-owned college. And she was indicted in August on charges that included forgery related to documents submitted to the Department of Education, and since then appears to have stepped down. She is facing the candidate who's with us today, Leonard, who spent more than 15 years as a high-ranking executive at Disney before moving to Amazon. And we are going to go ahead and jump right into our questions. The biggest job, that's really the only job that lawmakers have to do, is to write a budget that balances. Mm-hmm. Florida has had 3 years of record spending, thanks in large part to a massive infusion of federal COVID cash. Over the next 2 years, however, the leading state economist says that Florida could go from a $2 billion surplus to a $2.9 billion shortfall if things continue as they are now and losing that federal money. What should legislators do in 2025 to deal with that reality?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And what I can tell you is that I've spent a large part of my career in corporate finance, creating and managing budgets. And one of the first lessons that you learn in finance is that your budget is a reflection of your priorities. And our priorities here in Florida should be on things that are important to Floridians. And I'll give you, for example, in our district and across Florida, people are having problems with affordable housing. The legislature should be focused on finding solutions, and instead, they're raiding the Sadowski Housing Trust Fund, right, which was specifically set aside to address affordable housing. Additionally, we should look to cut frivolous expenses within the budget, and we should look at other funding sources. For example, by some estimates, when we pass Amendment 3, that could produce anywhere from $400 million to $1 billion in additional revenues that, depending on who you ask. But these are some of the ways that we should be thinking about our budget in order to prepare Florida for the future.
I just want to follow up a little bit on that issue. And that is that for decades, state funding has been used to support local priorities. Septic to sewer projects, mental health programs, arts and culture opportunities. And as I'm sure you know, this year, the governor slashed hundreds of millions of dollars in local projects, most notably killing the entire cultural grant budget. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the state has a role to play in funding these local priorities?
Yeah, I think what the governor did was unfortunate. And I do believe that state representatives should help to identify funds and fund local projects, because your local representatives are the ones who are closest to the constituents. And I think they're positioned to understand what the funding needs are for their respective communities, right? And if you look a little bit further at these decisions to fund local projects, I think there should also be a balance, right, between the funding for the community and what the community needs with responsible state governance. Because when you can get that balance right, it means we're going to be funding the right local projects that can, demonstrate accountability, right, to the constituents, that will make a positive impact on the community. And when done right, it could be a valuable strategy. But I'll tell you, and I'll just, point this out, that in today's political environment, we've got a governor who's been playing politics by rewarding and punishing people who don't fall in line with his agenda, right? And so that approach is going to hurt Floridians. And so I'm in support of, a transparent approach and an inclusive process, so we can decide which projects to fund, so we can ensure that, we are aligned with the overall goals of the state and the local communities.
Thank you for that answer. I wanted to move on and discuss Medicaid. First off, I just wanted to get on the record. Do you support expanding Medicaid to low-income working adults? And if you are elected, you'll be a part of the minority party. And do you see a path to convince the Republican majority to expand Medicaid? And how would you try to do that?
Look, I support it, and it currently looks like, based on what I've been reading, that there will probably be a 2026 ballot initiative, which I could also support. But, in this current political environment, what I would have to do if nothing changes is really work with the Republican supermajority. I know that they have not been responsive to constituents on this issue, but hopefully when I get to Tallahassee and can break that Republican supermajority, we can actually have some honest conversations. But I want to, again, let me go a little bit deeper here, because this one is important. Because in the US today, there's only 10 states that have not expanded Medicare. And like I said, we've got Republicans in the House who have not been flexible on this issue, and it's hurting Floridians. And it's hurting Floridians because we know that there are economic benefits when people have access to health care. We're going to have a healthier workforce. And when people have insurance, they're more apt to go to the doctor instead and seek treatment versus going to, an emergency room, which drives up costs. And so I'm in support of expanding Medicare to low income working families, because, it's going to benefit not only the families and Floridians, but it's going to benefit the economy here in Florida.
So the state recently passed universal vouchers. Do you support them? And what accountability should the legislature require of the schools to accept vouchers?
Well, I will tell you, the voucher train, has left the station, right? And so it's something that, we're going to be dealing with the issue for a long time, because, not only, is it creating, in some instances, budget shortfalls that we've been, having to cover, but, the large amount of students or the vast majority of students in the state actually go to traditional public schools, right? And so, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about budgets, what's important to us, our students and our children, from what I hear from my constituents here in House District 45, they are our priority. And so we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that they get the best education possible. And that starts with making sure that, we've got the best teachers possible, because these are the folks who sit in a room and educate our kids. They spend the most time with our kids. And so why wouldn't we want the best possible teachers? And to get the best possible teachers, we need to pay our teachers not at the bottom of what teachers get paid in the country, but we need to elevate that so that we're attracting teachers, so we don't have a teacher shortage that we're trying to deal with. And so I believe that, we're going to have to, invest in our students and invest in our teachers. And while vouchers, I think, parents have the right, let's just be clear, parents have the right to send their kids to private schools. They do. I support that. But what I don't support is the taxpayers subsidizing that choice, because we have a public school system that I believe can be improved when we focus and put our priorities in the right place.
Thank you for that. Wanted to ask about the recent news about state parkland. The governor's office was revealed to be working directly with the Department of Environmental Protection to build hotels and golf courses and pickleball and disc golf on state parkland with little public notice or study as to the environmental damage that they could cause. Only the public's outcry seemed to make them backtrack. First of all, did you oppose this? And what legislation would you suggest to ensure that it doesn't happen again?
And I'm sorry for the smile, because, of course I oppose it, right? That that was met with bipartisan outrage and bipartisan support that it was a stupid idea, right? And primarily because I think the governor is in a position where he feels emboldened, right? We've had a Republican majority and now supermajority for almost 30 years. And so when you have that sort of legislature that should be a check on the governor, they've done nothing but pave the way for, more power, more power grabs from the governor. And that's one of the big reasons why we need to work to make sure we get rid of this Republican supermajority. But on the positive side, what we've seen from this is that the power of advocacy is real, and that's promising. When people step up and speak up, it does make a difference. But it's also indicative of the fact that we do need more transparency in government. And so to answer your question, yes, I oppose it, and I believe we need more transparency in the way we operate in Tallahassee.
So the devastation of Hurricane Helene and Milton is still being tallied, but one tragic trend is emerging, and that is many of those who lost everything, including seniors, had dropped their insurance policies because they couldn't afford it. Florida residents pay more for it, and in many cases get less from the property insurance policies.
Mm-hmm.
Lawmakers have been dragged back to Tallahassee time and again to fix it, but there seems to be no fix in sight. What is your plan for rescuing Florida's property insurance market?
Well, I mean, this is a huge issue for a lot of folks, and a lot of folks are hurting. It pains me to hear, about folks who are, potentially losing their homes because they can't pay insurance. And hey, climate change is, out there. I mean, we've had 2 hurricanes, dramatic hurricanes here. And so this is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. This is a pocketbook issue for all Floridians, because it's just tragic. Now, I can tell you, I don't have a claim to have what we call the silver bullet that's going to solve this issue overnight. But I do know that Floridians need relief, and the $3 billion taxpayer-funded bailout to shore up the industry helped out the industry, but it didn't do anything for Floridians, right? For the homeowners. And so what I believe to start to address the issue is, first, we need to increase transparency by electing a commissioner versus appointing one, right? An elected commissioner would be responsible to the people who elected him versus someone who appointed him. So that would be one. I also think we need to have a bipartisan insurance advisory council that can advise the legislature on the right, directions to take. But at the end of the day, when we think about what's happening in this affordability crisis, we're going to need, to hold insurance companies accountable. We have to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. We have to, think about how we can, put someone in place who is not going to be beholden to special interests, who's going to be beholden to the people. And we have to have, smart people to advise and oversee the insurance, the insurance companies to make sure, they're acting on behalf of the people. And that's how we're going to address this issue, and that's how we're going to move this forward in the state.
One of the things that we've seen, and it's never been a non-issue, but it has drastically increased in recent years, is that the legislature has been undermining local government's ability to manage their own affairs. Most notably, recently, the extremely onerous requirements for dealing with local homeless populations, but also everything from rural boundaries to leaf blowers and plastic straws have been taken away from local governments and reserved to the state. What would you suggest as a way to roll back this heavy-handedness on the part of local government, on the part of state governments and local government?
Yeah, so, what I believe is that, while there's a place for state government, there's also a solid place for local government. And I do believe that, state government has been overreaching in a lot of areas and undermining, the ability for local governments to really handle local affairs. And, to your point, it's gone way too far in some instances, whether it be, within the Live Local Act, where, Tallahassee is preempting the ability for local governments to really build housing. HB 433 was, I think, a path in the wrong direction, where it was placing restrictions on wages and employment benefit requirements, as well as prohibiting cities and counties from adopting their own heat requirements. I mean, we're in Florida, for goodness sakes, and folks are out on the roads, in farms working. And so we need to be able to, make our own rules around that. And so what I would be as an advocate for these instances where, I believe state governments have a role to play and should have more autonomy in those things that take place within their communities. And so I would be an advocate for that, and I would be supporting it once I get to Tallahassee.
Would you be willing to support or file legislation that would give counties greater discretion in the use of tourist development taxes?
So, what I would say, and it really goes back to, my previous statement with regard to when we budget for things or we set aside funds for things, I believe that those dedicated funding sources should be used for what they're created for, right? And so in this instance, when you think about the, tourism development tax, it was really a fund to help promote tourism related activities and infrastructure, right? And so I would be supportive of that. Now, how those funds get spent within the local, communities, I think, as I stated earlier, local governments have a role to play. They're closer to, these issues and these problems, and, they have insights and innovations on how they can potentially deal with them. And so with regard to supporting the legislation, I'm generally supportive of governments having, local governments having, more control over, TDT funds. But, I would have to actually see the legislation before, I would have my up or down vote. But, I'm generally supportive.
Thank you for that. Could you quickly give us your opinions on Amendment 3 to legalize recreational marijuana?
Yeah, I mean, on Amendment 3, I support it. I think there is, a opportunity there when we think about the, funding potential of Amendment 3, but also when we think about its impact on police, where they can, instead of focusing on, small possession of marijuana, they can focus on things, violent crime, things that are, really an issue in our communities. And so from, to answer your question relative to Amendment 3, I support it.
Another question on amendments. How will you vote on Amendment 4, which is meant to protect reproductive rights, including abortion access for Florida women? And if it passes, what response do you see from the legislature?
So, I've got, a wife, I've got a daughter, and this is an issue that I think women across the state are very concerned with, because, they should have autonomy to make decisions about their own body, decisions that should be between their doctor, their family, and their God, not the legislature sitting in between that. And that's why I would support it. And in terms of, further attacks on potentially reproductive freedom from the legislature, this legislature has proven that there will be. And that's why it's going to be critical for the citizens to elect legislatures who, will not advocate for legislature getting in between personal medical decisions between a woman and her doctor.
Thank you very much. We have so much more that we'd love to talk to you about, but we did promise that we'd get you in and out pretty quickly. And I think that you've given a great, since you've been so concise with your answers, you gave us an opportunity to cover a lot of room in a short time.
Awesome.
And before we go to your closing statement, though, I did want to remind the people who are watching this that the Orlando Sentinel will be making an endorsement in this race, but we don't expect you to just take our word for it. We urge you to take a look at both candidates in this race. You have our additional excellent news coverage, lot of stories in the past couple months. Both of them have social media and websites. And we have seen some public forums, though, again, we haven't seen a lot of participation there with Representative Amnesty there. But she does have some good information out there about how she would vote and how she has voted. And we would then just say, take a look and see which one best represents your viewpoints and your values as a voter in this district. Most importantly, remember that through early voting, mail balloting, or in person, you have until November 5th to make your voice heard in this race, and it is a very important one. So thank you very much. And with that, Mr. Spencer, we'd like to ask you to wrap us up with a pitch on why voters should choose you.
Well, again, thank you all for this opportunity to address the voters in House District 45. And to the voters, you know, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I've been a community leader and executive since coming here to Walt Disney Company. And I've lived in this community for almost 2 decades. I've raised 2 kids here. And what I know from raising 2 kids here is that, you know, you need to be active in the community. You know, I've coached YMCA basketball, I've served on nonprofit boards, really trying to help these nonprofits get the resources they need to support our community. As an executive, I've worked around the world. I've brought folks together from different backgrounds to solve big problems. I've negotiated big deals with folks to find win-win solutions. And most importantly, I've worked with small businesses because that's a passion of mine. Because when small businesses grow, they create jobs, they drive economic impact, prosperity, and upward mobility in communities. Now, over the almost past 2 decades that I've lived here, I've made friends, I've talked to neighbors and folks around the community. And what they've told me is that they're concerned. They're concerned about the direction Tallahassee is going. People are concerned about the rising cost of living, homeowners insurance, finding affordable housing. But what they see is politicians trying to take away a woman's freedom to make decisions about their own health care. What they see are politicians creating issues and divisiveness amongst the community. And they told me they want me to go to Tallahassee to solve those problems for them, not to focus on these extremist cultural war agendas. They want someone who's going to work across the aisle, pull people together, and bring home win-win solutions. And that's why I'm in this race, and that's why I'm running to be your next representative for House District 45.
Thank you so much. And we wish you the best of luck, and we'll be all looking forward to seeing what happens on election day.